The Venezuelan Communications Minister arrives at the head of the government's delegation for talks with the opposition in Barbados. Former South African President Jacob Zuma begins a 5-day inquiry into allegations of corruption. And China once again condemns the U.S. planned arms sale to Taiwan. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez from Quito. This is From the South. We begin in Barbados, where the Venezuelan government's delegation has returned to continue talks with the opposition. The head of the delegation and Minister of Communications, Jorge Rodriguez, made the announcement on Twitter.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning. The delegation of the Bolivarian government of Venezuela has arrived back in the generous country of Barbados to continue the dialogue for peace with the different sectors of the Venezuelan opposition. We maintain what has been the guiding principle of President Nicolas Maduro, a permanent dialogue for peace, for peaceful coexistence, for the constitutional and democratic resolution of political and social differences. No more recourse to violence or to unconstitutional actions. We adhere to the words of Pope Francis, so that through dialogue we can resolve the difficulties and differences by peaceful means. We trust in the facilitating role of the government of Norway, and we thank the government and people of Barbados for their hospitality.
Our correspondent in Caracas, Leonel Retamal, has more.
In the last few minutes, we've learned from the Minister Jorge Rodriguez that the government delegation is back in Barbados. The delegation also includes the Governor of Miranda State, Hector Rodriguez, and the Foreign Minister, Jorge Ariasa. They are there to take part in a fourth round of talks, the second in Barbados, facilitated by the government of Norway. The minister said they were following the orientations of President Nicolas Maduro to seek a peaceful, negotiated settlement of differences. Foreign Minister Ariasa also highlighted the declaration in support of Venezuela from the non-aligned movement in the light of the report on Venezuela presented by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. The non-aligned movement rejected any attempt at intervention in Venezuela and promised to set up a mechanism to support the country. President Nicolas Maduro welcomed the declaration from the non-aligned movement, which will be meeting in Venezuela this week.
Our correspondent, Leonel Retamal. And in other news, the United States Department of Justice has announced new migration regulations set to disproportionately affect asylum seekers from Central America. The DOJ has published a new rule stating that asylum seekers who have passed through another country will not be able to apply for asylum at the U.S. border. It means that those who hazard the journey to the U.S. through Mexico from countries in Central America with legitimate asylum claims may be ineligible to make their case. Whilst scheduled to go into effect on Tuesday, the regulation is expected to be challenged in the courts. And communities across the United States have come together to protect themselves from raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, commonly known as ICE. ICE began massive raids in 10 major cities across the country over the weekend, sparking a wave of solidarity as communities pulled together to offer safe spaces. The raids have been set to target newly settled migrant families, but advocacy groups and activists have been vigilant. They warned the migrants not to open their doors to ICE if they don't have the right warrant, and suggested that all interactions with ICE agents be recorded. Ahead of the raids, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, took the decision to permanently ban ICE from accessing police databases. Mayor Lightfoot added that police in the city will not cooperate with ICE to detain residents.
We have been spending today going to different neighborhoods to continue the effort to educate people about what their rights are. There's a tremendous amount of fear in our city. Our neighbors are worried about their status, worried as to whether or not the knock on the door is going to mean that ICE is coming for them. So what we're trying to do is lower the fear by giving them information, and the information is empowering them. What you see behind me are people who have been diligently working in neighborhoods, community navigators, who are literally going door to door from business to business, educating people about what their rights are. I think people are grateful to have the information, but we still have a lot of work to be done.
Protests took place across the U.S. in outrage against the government's plans against migrants. Marchers in Chicago demanded that the White House close the camps, referring to detention facilities where migrants are held in appalling conditions. They also called for ICE to be abolished. And families demonstrated outside a migrant detention center in Florida over the weekend, where nearly 25% of the population identify as having Latino heritage and face a greater risk.
I mean, it's a mixture of horror, fear, disgust, anger. You have such a large Latino community in Miami, and we are directly affected by what is going on in these camps right now. It's right outside our front doors, and it's happening across the nation. We have ICE that is coordinating to honestly separate families and ruin the futures of these families, of these children.
Puerto Rico has erupted in anger following revelations regarding Governor Ricardo Rosselló's conduct in office. Support for the governor has plummeted since a report by the Investigative Journalist Center revealed a social media chat between high-ranking political figures administered by Rosselló engaged in homophobic, racist, and misogynist discourse. Protesters have taken to the streets of the capital, San Juan, to demand the governor's resignation. Allegations of corruption have also been leveled against Rosselló in recent weeks. And we spoke with Rafael Bernabe, spokesperson for the Citizens' Victory Movement, the political party that organized the demonstrations against Rosselló. He explained the significance of political anger in Puerto Rico.
Well, there are two things are new. One of them is that last Tuesday, the FBI arrested several former members of Rosselló's cabinet, in particular the former Secretary of Education, and accused her formally of acts of corruption. This is a person that the labor movement and many educators in Puerto Rico had struggled against for a long time, but the accusations have confirmed what people have been saying over many years. The second thing is that it was revealed that the governor over many months had this private, so-called private chat, an internet private chat with all of his cabinet members and collaborators and so on, and his consultants. And this document is devastating. It's full of racist, sexist comments, jokes about people who died during the Hurricane Maria, jokes about women, jokes about working people. There are elements of conspiracy to make sure that the students are able to frame the students and accuse them of violent acts and so on. So there are many things that came out in this chat. It's about a 100-page document full of really terrible stuff. And that has really brought out the anger of people. There's no word to describe it but anger. And people are really out on the street saying we don't want to be ruled. We don't want to be governed by somebody who has these type of ideas in their head. So they are demanding the resignation of the governor. Well, the Constitution of Puerto Rico provides for the impeachment of a governor. The way this can be done is that the House of Representatives has to carry out an investigation. If the House of Representatives finds that there are reasons for impeachment, then it makes an accusation, which the Senate has to then process. The Senate has to carry out what is basically a trial and to determine if the governor should be separated from his post. Our movement, the movement of Victoria Ciudadana, which has one legislator, we have presented a petition to start that impeachment process. Fortunately, the Puerto Rico Independence Party and the Popular Democratic Party, which are the two other opposition parties, have joined this petition. So we hope that at least some of the legislators of Rosselló's own party will come over and sign the document so we can start that impeachment process.
To the Dominican Republic now, where people took to the streets at the weekend to protest against corruption and a proposed political reform. Daisy Toussaint reports.
Once again, the Green March brought out thousands of people to demand that the authorities put an end to corruption and impunity.
This is a civic movement to demand that they give back the money they have stolen and that they implement policies for quality education, healthcare, housing and jobs with respect for the environment.
The march is also demanding a cap on fuel prices and the protection of natural resources, and it opposes a constitutional reform that would allow the president to stand for re-election.
We say absolutely no to this spirited reform that will allow the re-election of President Danilo Medina, who clearly wants to perpetuate himself in power, that undermines the democratic rights of the Dominican people.
The demonstration, called the Green March of the Kibao, aimed to revive the civic protests that have been the hallmark of this movement.
The Dominican Republic is going through a major crisis, which is political, economic and cultural. The ruling Dominican Liberation Party is sinking this country. It has plunged us into debt. More than half our GDP now goes to pay the external debt, which had become the eternal debt.
The march brought together opposition leaders, students, social movements and civil society groups. The Green March says it will stay in the streets until it puts an end to corruption and impunity and prevents this constitutional reform that could give President Danilo Medina a third term in office.
Coming up, fresh Ebola fears in the Democratic Republic of Congo as a case is reported in a major urban area. Don't go away. Thank you for joining us again. Let's continue. Former South African President Jacob Zuma has appeared before an inquiry to answer corruption allegations. Zuma denies the charges leveled against him and accuses adversaries of plotting his downfall. The accusations involve his relationship with the Gupta family, which has been accused of influencing cabinet appointments and winning lucrative state contracts illegally. The former president has also been accused of taking bribes from South African logistics firm Bosasa. Zuma was forced to resign as president of South Africa in February 2018.
I'm Jacob. I've been given every other name, and I'd never responded to those issues. Firstly, because I believe it is important that we all respect one another, that we must say things we know about other people, not just tell things that we cannot prove.
Let's turn to our correspondent in Pretoria, Matuba Malaji, with the details.
South Africa's former President Jacob Zuma has started giving his side of the story at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture headed by the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Former President Jacob Zuma started giving his side of the story, telling the inquiry that there's been a conspiracy against him when he was leader in the ANC, even before he became president, detailing times when he was charged with corruption and as you may know now that he's still facing charges of corruption in the Pietermaritzburg High Court, which he's yet to finish that trial alongside a French arms company, Thales. But now, today, former President Jacob Zuma told the Commission that he was treated unfairly and that the unfair treatment that he's received from from organizations he refused to mention, but does claim that these are authorities in foreign countries that are intelligence, but did not name the countries. And he says some intelligence people or who could be spies are within South Africa and most probably within the African National Congress, which is the political party that he served as president under. And he's due to continue for 5 days on the witness stand to give the side of his story, and he'll be questioned because some former members of his executive have implicated him in some sort of wrong allegations of wrongdoing or even corruption. Indian family, the Gupta family, that he's been accused of outsourcing his executive power to this controversial family, whereas the Gupta family would decide who becomes minister of what, so that they're positioned correctly to make business with government. But in the next 5 days, these are allegations that former President Jacob Zuma will be setting the record straight and giving the side of his story throughout the week. It's back to you, studio.
That was Matuba Matlaji from South Africa. 2 health workers have been killed on duty in eastern Congo. According to the DRC Ministry of Health, the 2 community health workers were engaged in Ebola prevention work in the North Kivu province when 2 unidentified men shot and killed them. They are reported to have been receiving death threats for months. The ministry said it is concerned with how violent attacks on health workers is hampering efforts to contain the Ebola pandemic. Also in the DRC, a person infected with the Ebola virus has been confirmed in Goma district. Goma is the first big city to be affected by the disease since its outbreak in the east of the country almost a year ago. The health ministry said health workers have been put on alert in the area to ensure that the virus does not spread quickly in the densely populated area close to the Rwandan border. The World Health Organization has urged people to exercise caution and not panic.
We will also boost surveillance measures at entry and exit points to ensure that neighbors, other provinces and neighboring Rwanda are also protected. Measures will also be taken to ensure that these checks are effective so that it doesn't spread.
Somalia is intensifying security after 26 people were killed in an attack on a hotel last week. The government of Somalia is on high alert and has mobilized security forces to increase surveillance in Kismayo, where the incident took place. The attack was the most severe since Allied forces dislodged al-Shabaab from the port city 6 years ago. A group of armed assailants detonated a car bomb at the hotel before storming the facility and engaging security forces in a gun battle that lasted more than 10 hours.
I call on security forces to increase surveillance to prevent a repeat of this kind of terrorist attacks, especially now as we are heading towards elections. I also appeal to the public to provide relevant information to security forces to thwart potential threats to security.
Security forces shot and killed a protester in Sudan on Sunday. Demonstrators continue demanding justice for those killed during the latest clashes with Sudanese security forces. The military council and civilian opposition are still discussing the final details of a power-sharing agreement ahead of elections, after former President Omar al-Bashir was toppled in a coup following weeks of mass protests. More protesters are reported to have been wounded and hospitalized after the incident. Still to come, the UN Security Council praises former FARC combatants for their commitment to peace in Colombia. Stay with us.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. More news at Telesur. China has reiterated its displeasure with the planned United States arms sale to Taiwan. Beijing has promised to take firm action against U.S. companies that violate previously agreed arrangements between the two countries.
U.S. arms sales are a severe violation of international law and norms. They severely violate the One China principle and the regulation of 3 Sino-US joint communiques. They harm China's sovereignty and national security. In order to protect national interests, China will sanction US companies that participate in selling weapons to Taiwan. China's government and Chinese companies will not cooperate or have commercial contacts with these US companies.
In El Salvador, teenage rape survivor Evelyn Hernandez is facing a retrial after her 30-year prison sentence was annulled in an appeal at the Supreme Court in February. Hernandez, who is now 21, was convicted of murdering her child in 2017 and jailed for nearly 3 years after a stillbirth. The female judge at the time ruled that the teenager had induced an abortion, which has been a crime in El Salvador since 1997. Women's rights activists say her retrial is a test for the new president's position on abortion. The Cuban parliament has passed a new electoral law aimed at improving governance. The new law passed unanimously by the National Assembly and creates the role of prime minister and provincial governors. It is aimed at boosting policy execution and streamlines governance by reducing the number of National Assembly lawmakers from 605 to 474. The new measure will be implemented at the next elections in 2024.
This proposal is made to the National Assembly, and here the candidacy is approved and then goes to an election and has to obtain more than 50% of the valid votes of Parliament, and it is a direct election here in Parliament.
United Nations Security Council delegates on a visit to Colombia have praised former FARC combatants for their commitment to the peace process, despite concerns over the government's adherence to the agreement. Peace accords between the Colombian government of then-President Juan Manuel Santos and the FARC were signed in 2016 after negotiations in Norway and Cuba. However, the current president, Iván Duque, has sought to undermine the peace deal, with up to 31% of the agreement yet to be implemented. At least 140 former FARC combatants have been murdered since the accords were signed. The Security Council is set to deliver its report later in July.
But what I've seen is the sight of people who are fighting now in Congress, now settling their differences through talking. I've met ex-combatants who are trying to create a new life for themselves in the agriculture business, growing tomatoes, making a profit out of the land rather than fighting. And these are incredibly big achievements. So that seems to me the biggest thing. The fact of the agreement, the fact that people, whatever their differences, are still trying to make it work and are committed to making it work. And the fact that people have really laid down their weapons and are now engaging on a political level.
And during the Security Council's visit, Colombia's president has asked them to accompany the peace process for 1 more year. Let's see why.
President Iván Duque met with delegates of the UN Security Council, where he expressed his commitment for the peace process.
Today I delivered a letter to the President of the UN Security, reaffirming that we want the mission to be here for 1 more year, because we consider that their work is vital to the process of reincorporation.
During the statement, the UN Security Council delegate expressed grave concern about the assassination of social leaders and former combatants. The Security Council also met with members of different political parties, among them the FARC. After the meeting, the Congressman Marcos Calarca said President Duque's alleged commitment to the peace accords was a lie.
The murders continue. Now there are 2 every day, and there are no results from the investigations, which is important. But what is even more critical is avoiding murders. The government is saying there are results in 60% of cases, but that is a lie.
At the end of the meeting, Senator Roy Barreras regretted that members of the Centro Democrático failed to attend the meeting. He also called for a true commitment to peace with social guarantees.
There is a clear hostility against peace defenders and also systematic persecution that needs to end, because hate speeches precede physical violence. A meeting that ends with a statement from members of the Social Security Council supporting peace in Colombia is a success from Colombia, but also for the Security Council that has been accompanying the process.
The Security Council held a private meeting with delegates from civil society, and before leaving, they also met those most affected by the conflict in Colombia.
And with that, we end our news brief. But remember, you can find all of our stories by checking our website, telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria. And be sure to check us out on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.